At the courthouse that morning, as Gareth's name echoed in the judge's order, I felt decades of sacrifice and silence gather in my chest like one deep breath. My hands trembled only once before steadying years of raising a daughter alone had taught me more than law ever could. Quietly, I signed the restitution papers and slid a second envelope across the table, knowing the real surprise was still ahead. This was only the beginning of how I chose to rebuild, not just recover. Before I continue the story, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment letting me know where you're watching from. It was well past midnight, the hour when even the crickets outside my kitchen window had gone quiet. I sat at the table with my retirement papers spread out like an uneven fan, the small lamp casting a honey-colored glow on numbers that once felt solid. My pen clicked softly in my fingers, a nervous habit I hadn't indulged in years. The smell of old coffee drifted from a mug gone cold, and the only sound in the house was the soft hum of the refrigerator. My porch light, left on out of habit, made a faint halo on the wet sidewalk beyond the window. At exactly 2 a.m., a sharp knock split the silence. It wasn't the tentative tap of a neighbor or the polite rap of a delivery. It was a fist, urgent and uneven, rattling the glass pane of my front door. I froze, pen midair, my pulse thudding louder than the refrigerator. Years of living alone had taught me to recognize the difference between inconvenience and danger, and this sound belonged to neither, but something in between. I rose slowly, sliding my reading glasses down the bridge of my nose, and padded toward the hall, my bare feet pressed against the cool tile. Another knock, 3 hard blows this time, echoed through the entryway. I flipped on the hall light and peered through the side window. Rain streaked the glass. Under the porch light stood my daughter, Aveline hair plastered to her cheeks, mascara blurred into dark rivers. She clutched her phone in one hand and wrapped the other arm tightly around herself. Her shoulders trembled. In that instant, 100 possibilities crossed my mind. Car accident, health scare, some late-night argument gone wrong, but her eyes, wide and wet, told me it was something different. I opened the door without a word. Cold air and the smell of damp asphalt swept in with her. "Mom," she whispered, her voice catching. I placed my hand gently on her elbow and guided her inside, closing the door firmly behind her. Her coat smelled like rain and perfume gone sour from tears. I took her bag, set it on the floor, and led her to the kitchen. She sat down without taking off her coat. Her phone screen glowed between her fingers. He emptied it," she said, voice breaking into fragments. "Everything." I woke up and the account was at 0. "He's gone." She turned the phone toward me. The banking app displayed a glaring red 0 where her savings should have been. A notification banner read, "Transfer complete. 2:04 a.m. My stomach tightened, but my face stayed calm. I took a breath and leaned closer, noting the date and time like I was back in my paralegal days. I didn't pepper her with questions. Years of watching clients collapse under shock had taught me to let the facts land first. "Tell me slowly," I murmured. She swiped through screenshots, transactions messages, a final text from her husband that read, "Only don't call me." Her hands shook so badly the phone rattled on the table. I reached across and steadied it with 2 fingers. "Drink some water," I said softly, sliding a glass toward her. She obeyed, eyes downcast like a child after a nightmare. The clock above the stove ticked loud and steady, marking each second of her unraveling story. I listened, my mind already sorting threads, bank name time stamp, possible legal steps without letting my expression harden. Beneath the ache of disbelief, a slow current of resolve began to move. Betrayal had a familiar smell, and I had no intention of letting it linger in my house. I walked to the front door and turned the deadbolt once more, a deliberate click. Then I came back, set my reading glasses on the bridge of my nose, and opened my laptop. Aveline stared at me, still trembling. "Mom." "What are you doing?" she whispered. "Making a list," I said quietly. "We're not going to panic. We're going to document." I pushed the cold coffee aside and placed the laptop in front of me, the screen's blue light spilling over the table. My fingers hovered above the keys as I glanced at my daughter. This night isn't the end. I thought it's the beginning of a storm, and I've walked through storms before. I tightened my grip on the mug of cold coffee, knowing this night was only the beginning of a storm. The rain tapped steadily against the kitchen window as I guided Aveline back to the table. The clock on the stove read just after 2:30. She sat where she had before, shoulders curved inward, hands wrapped around the same glass of water she hadn't touched. I reached for the tissue box, setting it beside her. "Blow your nose?" I murmured a gentle command to keep her grounded. As she dabbed at her eyes, my gaze drifted to the bag she'd dropped near the chair. Its flap had fallen open, and a thin white corner of an envelope peeked out, faintly damp from the rain. I filed it away in my mind the way I used to flag inconsistencies in affidavits. She sniffled and whispered, "I don't even know what to do." Her mascara had streaked further, and her thumb rubbed at the phone screen like she could erase what she'd seen. I poured her a fresh glass of water and handed it over, feeling the old tug of maternal instinct, tempered by something harder, a creeping suspicion. Little details, her hurried entrance, the bag thrown carelessly down that envelope, told me more was hiding beneath her panic. But I kept my face soft, sliding another tissue across the table, letting her speak when she was ready. When she fell silent, I reached for her phone. "Let me see," I said quietly. She hesitated, then handed it over. The screen still showed the bank account at 0. I tapped back to the alerts list. The first one dated 5 days ago, unusual transfer detected. Another 2 days later, wire completed, $45,000. The last one only hours old. She hadn't opened any of them. My thumb scrolled slowly, each notification like a nail driven deeper. The rain outside grew heavier, a muffled drumbeat under the kitchen's dim light. "You got these last week." I asked, more statement than question. Aveline dropped her gaze. I didn't look," she admitted. "We were busy. He kept saying he'd handle it." Her voice cracked. I kept scrolling, reading the amounts, the routing numbers, noting a name in one of the memos, Isolde Venn. My legal mind cataloged it all, but outwardly. I only breathed slow and even. "Okay," I said, finally setting the phone down. "We'll handle what we can tonight. Later, we'll go to the bank." I brushed crumbs from the table, an old habit, and placed the phone face down between us. She stood abruptly. "I need to wash my face," she murmured, and left the kitchen, her footsteps soft on the tile. The moment she disappeared into the bathroom, the envelope in her bag slid out fully and landed with a quiet flutter on the floor. I bent and picked it up. Inside lay a crisp boarding pass. The paper smelled faintly of perfume and rain. Under the airline logo, 2 names printed side by side, Gareth Quinlan and Isolde Venn. The destination was Miami flight departing in 6 hours. My heart tightened, but my expression stayed blank. The rain outside hissed like static, and in that sound my anger cooled into a hard, protective edge. This wasn't just a husband running off with savings. It was a premeditated escape. Another woman. Another betrayal. I stared at the pass long enough to memorize the details: flight number, departure time, terminal gate, then slid it back into the envelope and tucked it exactly where it had been. No sound from the bathroom yet. My eyes went to the clock, 3:25. The night stretched long and heavy, but my mind had shifted gears. I reached for my old legal notebook from the counter. Its leather cover felt cool and familiar under my palms. Flipping it open, I began a new page with today's date and wrote 2 words at the top: evidence log. My pen hovered as I listened to the water run down the hall. The moment to reveal what I'd found had not yet come. I closed my notebook slowly, knowing the moment to reveal what I'd found had not yet come. The rain had not let up a steady whisper against the windows as the clock slid past 3:30. I watched Aveline at my kitchen sink, dabbing her face with a damp paper towel, her reflection pale in the window glass. She stood there in my robe now, her coat draped over the chair. The glow of the under-cabinet light carved a soft edge around her, but my eyes drifted past her to the notebook on the table. My pen lay uncapped, its ink dotting a corner of the page. I found myself staring at it, and as always, my mind moved back to where the first warning bells had rung. 2 weeks earlier, I'd sat across from her at the Magnolia Room, an upscale restaurant on the edge of Houston's Museum District. White tablecloths, copper pendants hanging low, and a scent of rosemary drifting from the kitchen. Gareth had insisted on the place for his business dinner, and Aveline had called me at the last minute saying, "Come, Mom, meet the advisor who's helping us." When I arrived, she waved me over to their booth. Across from her sat a sleek woman with dark hair pinned in a perfect chignon. She smiled without warmth and extended a manicured hand. "Isolde Venn," she said, "financial consultant." Gareth slid closer to her as if to make room for me, but his knee stayed pressed against hers. I remembered how the restaurant's light glinted off the stem of Gareth's wineglass. He and Isolde spoke in low, quick bursts about offshore timing and liquidating before the window closes. I picked at my salad, catching Aveline's eye more than once, trying to telegraph caution. But she looked giddy proud of this world they were entering. "It's completely legal," Isolde cooed, showing a graph on her tablet. Gareth nodded vigorously. "We'll move funds quickly, no worries." My stomach tightened. Years of paralegal work had taught me to recognize the smell of a scheme dressed up as opportunity. When the plates were cleared, I asked Aveline to step outside with me. The night air was soft, magnolia-scented, a faint drizzle falling. "Honey," I said, "just slow down. This all sounds too fast." She bristled. "Mom, not tonight," she hissed. "You always think the worst. He's trying to build a future for us." I opened my mouth to argue, but closed it again. Her eyes shone with that blend of devotion and defiance I'd seen before. She slipped back inside, leaving me under the awning with my unease. The sound of running water in my kitchen snapped me back to the present. Aveline turned her eyes red and blurted, "You've always hated him. You're happy now." The words struck like a slap, not for their volume, but for their precision. She thought I wanted this. Wanted Gareth exposed, her life dismantled. I inhaled slowly, holding her gaze without speaking. My heart felt heavy, but my face stayed still. In my mind, I counted the times I'd bitten my tongue at holidays, at birthdays, at those dinners where Gareth's jokes made her laugh and made me flinch. "I'm not happy about any of this," I said quietly, keeping my voice steady. She dropped her eyes to the floor, shoulders shaking. The kitchen light buzzed softly above us. I reached for a fresh towel, handed it to her, and then sat back down at the table. My notebook lay open, a small island of order in the chaos. I wrote the date again, underlining it once. The pen felt solid between my fingers, more like an anchor than a weapon. I turned back to my notes, quietly choosing silence as strategy. Each line I wrote steadied me. I wasn't retreating. I was preparing. The rain outside masked the sound of my pen scratching across the paper. I closed my notebook again this time, knowing my silence was no longer weakness, but preparation. The digital clock on my microwave read 3:33 a.m. as I slid my notebook back in front of me. The rain had turned from a whisper to a hiss, washing the street outside in a silver sheen. Aveline sat hunched at the kitchen table, her hair damp, eyes red. I flipped to a clean page and wrote a title in bold block letters, Midnight Checklist. Underneath, I began numbering steps with the same steady hand I had once used to file court exhibits. I dialed the 24/7 fraud line and put the phone on speaker. The hold music was a soft jazz loop that felt strangely out of place in our pre-dawn kitchen. When a voice finally answered, I confirmed my identity, reading out the last 4 digits and my security phrase. "Freeze all debit and credit linked to joint accounts ending in 4219, I said evenly. My pen moved as I wrote each reference number the rep gave me. I could feel Aveline's gaze on me, the way a child watches a pilot steer through turbulence. Another call, another hold tone. "Yes." "Lock the credit report," I instructed. "Flag identity theft alerts." Each checkbox on my list filled in with a neat stroke, my focus narrowing until only tasks and timestamps existed. Next, I guided Aveline through her phone. "New password here," I murmured. "2-factor there." She sniffled and nodded, fingers trembling as she typed. We printed recent statements and fed them into a labeled folder. The little printer chugged, spitting out evidence like a metronome of our new reality. Click screenshot. Click highlight suspicious payee. Save that to transfers 3, I said quietly. She exhaled between sobs, and I kept my voice low steady so she could borrow my calm. On one page, I wrote times amounts and names as if already prepping a future affidavit. While we waited on hold with a credit bureau, her phone buzzed with a notification from social media. Aveline turned it toward me without a word. On the screen was Gareth beaming beside a glossy Man of the Year plaque and a gleaming watch box captioned, "Providing for family honored tonight." I zoomed in with 2 fingers. The charge matched a withdrawal I'd logged 30 minutes earlier. The watch's model number was in our statement. Behind Gareth's shoulder, a faint reflection in a mirrored column showed Isolde's silhouette holding the phone for the shot. My stomach went cold. Aveline's lips trembled. I enlarged the reflection once more, memorizing the shape of that pinched chignon. The public mask and the private theft sat side by side on the screen. I set the phone down and looked at my daughter. From this moment, I said softly but firmly, "No more withdrawals. No more explanations to him. We act first, we explain later." Her hands clutched her mug like a lifeline. I composed a brief notice to Gareth Access suspended pending review. Carbon copied the bank's fraud address. Evidence trail established. The click of send sounded louder than the rain. I reached across the table and squeezed Aveline's hand once. My voice held both sorrow and steel. We're not victims tonight. We're witnesses, and we're moving. The kitchen clock ticked toward 4:30. With the accounts frozen and his image exposed in our hands, I knew the next move had to be bigger and public. Dawn pressed a pale stripe through the blinds when I turned the lamp toward the center of the table. The kitchen had become a command center, mugs ringed with coffee, my old briefcase open. Aveline rubbed her eyes with the heel of her hand and stared at me as if waiting for permission to breathe. I slid the sealed manila folder across the wood. The flap rasped. Inside were copies I had kept because something in me refused to trust the ease of Gareth's explanations. I placed each page beneath the lamp. Dates in the corner, notary stamps, clauses that looked harmless until you read the verbs twice. "See here," I said, tapping a paragraph that shifted authority to act in exigent circumstances. The handwriting at the bottom curved into Aveline's name, but the crossbars were wrong. The E too neat. Her lips parted. "That's my signature," she whispered. But I didn't sign that day. I handed her a yellow highlighter. "Mark what you recognize." The pen clicked in her shaking hand. Another sheet, another surprise in the subparagraphs. Power to open or close ancillary accounts without notice authorization to gift assets for public relations purposes. I didn't look at her as I spoke. I spoke to the facts. "He built escape hatches in plain sight," I said. "He counted on you trusting the title line and not the fine print." She swallowed. "He brought papers when I was late for work," she said. "He said we'd miss a fee if I didn't sign." The lamp made a small golden island in the dark. My laptop chimed. Subject line security footage attached. Sender Rowan Drexler. I felt the old steadiness return to my hands. Rowan doesn't waste words, and he doesn't send anything he can't swear to. I opened the message. 3 still images loaded in a strip, each stamped with the bank lobby camera time code. In the first, Gareth stood at the counter, angled toward a woman in a dark blazer. Isolde. In the second, the teller slid a form across. Gareth's pen hovered. In the third, both of them looked down together as if the ink itself were a secret. "Look at the clock," I said. It matched a withdrawal I had already circled. I clicked to enlarge. The watch face on Gareth's wrist reflected the lobby light, the same model he had posted beside that plaque. Behind glass, a security guard leaned on his stool. Beside Gareth's elbow, a handbag with a gold clasp. Isolde's rested on the counter, open like a beak. He took her to the bank, Aveline said, voice gone hollow. I forwarded the message to my external account and saved the images to a labeled folder. Rowan says he'll keep more if they try to delete, I added. I scrolled to the note beneath the pictures, saw them Monday noon. Teller later reported multiple transfer authorizations, pulling full footage. I saved the email as a PDF. My briefcase swallowed the drive with a click that steadied my breathing. Aveline slumped back. I kept telling myself he was just ambitious, she said. Ambition without ethics is extraction, I replied. There's a difference. You were quiet for months, she said. I thought you didn't like him. I was reading, I answered, and waiting. I pulled a legal pad closer and began to outline next moves. Reports to the bank and credit bureaus were already filed. Next, police report to establish a case number, appointment with a consumer protection officer, letter to HR at Gareth's firm to notify of potential misconduct, request to the family court clerk to pre-file a financial disclosure demand if needed, and the airport Aveline asked, eyes flicking to her bag. I nodded. If he's leaving today, the boarding pass in your envelope tells us when. We practice lines at the table like actors before opening night. You will ask one question at a time, I said. You will not apologize for asking. You will not negotiate in a hallway. If he tries to joke, you'll let the silence land. She repeated after me, stumbling, then finding her voice. When she faltered, I reminded her to drop her shoulders and breathe low. The dawn made thin ladders of light across the tile, and in that pale geometry, I watched my daughter step, however shakily, out of the fog. The kettle clicked off. I poured water over fresh grounds and let the smell settle the room. We printed the forged signature pages and clipped them by date. I labeled the folder, Signatures Suspected Forgery. I added Rowan's email to another folder labeled Footage Bank Lobby. 2 drives mirrored each other, one in my briefcase, one in the fireproof box in the pantry. Overkill, Aveline asked with a wet laugh. Redundancy, I said. Paper remembers what people forget. As the sky lifted from slate to pearl, I zipped the briefcase and locked it. I touched the lid like a benediction. This is just the start, I told her. We move quietly, but we move fast. She nodded, a new steadiness in her face. Not confidence exactly, but alignment. She slipped the boarding pass back into her envelope and slid the envelope into her bag. I checked the time. 5:15. We stood. I turned off the lamp and the room expanded to its real size again. The ordinary kitchen of an ordinary house in Houston, where a mother had decided ordinary would not be the end of the story. Inside, I picked up my keys. The briefcase felt heavier than it was. Evidence always does. With the proof secured and the plan forming, I knew the moment to strike was close. The sky was a pale gray ribbon on the horizon when I backed out of the driveway. The clock on the dashboard glowed 7:02 a.m. Aveline sat beside me, clutching the folder against her chest, the way she used to hold her school books. Her knuckles were white. Her phone screen dimmed and lit again with messages she didn't open. The highway signs flicked by a North Freeway airport exit, each one a drumbeat counting down. I kept my hand steady on the wheel and my voice low, rehearsing the plan. You'll stay back until I signal, I said. Rowan's already alerted airport security. We're not guessing anymore. She nodded, eyes on the windshield. Rainwater still beaded along the wipers, but the dawn light made it look like glass threads breaking apart. The car smelled faintly of coffee and legal pads. My heart pounded in a measured rhythm, a metronome of anticipation rather than panic. Inside the terminal, the air was cool, sharp with the scent of espresso and floor polish. Announcements rolled overhead in clipped voices. I positioned Aveline by a column near the newsstand where she could see without being seen. Breathe, I whispered. Ahead, just past the security checkpoint, Gareth stood with his back to us, rolling a matching suitcase beside Isolde. His hair was slicked back, the same hand-polished look he wore at that Man of the Year event. Isolde's coat collar was turned up. She scanned the boarding area like a bird ready to bolt. My pulse slowed, even as my steps carried me closer. The folder's edge pressed against my palm through my bag. Sir, can we have a word? The officer's voice cut through the boarding call as I reached the rope line. Gareth turned brows, lifting in practiced surprise. "What is this about?" he barked, holding out his boarding pass. Another officer scanned it. The screen flashed red. Isolde shifted, inching sideways. I opened the folder and handed over Rowan's printed email and the attached stills, Gareth and Isolde at the bank counter, signatures, timestamps. The officer glanced from paper to man. Gareth's protest rose. "This is harassment. Those funds are mine," but the echo in the high ceiling made his words sound hollow. Aveline's eyes caught on the gold watch at his wrist, the one she had once saved 3 paychecks to buy him. She bit her lip hard enough to leave a mark, but stayed put. I said nothing, only watched as the security team stepped in crisp movements like punctuation marks. Isolde tried to slip toward another gate, but an attendant intercepted her with a polite hand. The noise faded as if we were under glass. Gareth's voice dropped to a hiss I could barely hear. "You'll regret this," he muttered. I met his gaze, steady as a level beam. "We already have." The officer led him aside. The folder in my bag felt heavier now, not lighter. Rowan appeared from behind a pillar, his badge clipped to his belt. Without a word, he handed me a plain envelope. "Came in overnight," he murmured. "Another victim." My fingers trembled for the first time that morning as I broke the seal. Inside was a single-page letter, handwritten, describing the same pattern of promises, transfers and disappearances, names, different method, the same. The writer's closing line read, "If you're reading this, you're not alone." I folded it carefully, feeling something shift inside me. This wasn't just about my daughter anymore. I glanced at Aveline. Her eyes were red but clear, fixed on me as though she were seeing me for the first time. I slipped the letter back into the envelope and tucked it next to the folder. "This is only the beginning," I said quietly. "We move quietly, but we move fast." The airport buzzed on around us, rolling suitcases. Coffee cups murmured apologies. In that moment, standing between the departure gates and the gray morning light, I felt the scope of what had begun to unfold. Watching Gareth led away, I realized this was not just about my daughter anymore. It was about every victim he had touched. I sat at the narrow conference table in the Harris County District Attorney's office, the soft hum of an old air vent filling the quiet. Aveline sat across from me, her hands clasped in her lap, eyes still red from the airport. Dawn light pushed through the high windows, catching on the stainless steel of the thumb drive Rowan had handed me. I slid it into the DA's laptop, watching the little icon appear on the screen. The assistant DA, a calm woman with salt and pepper hair, nodded at me. "This came from Rowan Drexler," I said softly, making sure every word was clear. "He got it from the cooperating victim whose letter we saw at the airport. The metadata has been verified, no question about authenticity." I signed the release form with steady strokes, my signature, a small act of control after months of being undermined. My finger hovered over the play button. Across the table, the assistant DA folded her hands, waiting. I took a breath that reached all the way down to my shoes and pressed. Gareth's voice filled the room, smug and unguarded. "She's so gullible." Moving the funds was easier than I thought. His laugh followed, low and careless, and then a female voice, Isolde's, whispered something about the award money. The words had been captured by a bank's security camera mic, clear enough for a courtroom. I didn't watch the video. I watched the faces of the DA's staff. One covered her mouth. Another murmured, "This will go viral." Notifications began popping on my phone even before the clip ended. News outlets had received the file from the DA's press liaison. Headlines shifted in real time: Houston mother's warnings, ignored confession video shows, financial fraud. The comments scrolling under the articles changed tone from skepticism to sympathy, from gossip to outrage. Aveline turned her eyes to me. "Mom," she whispered, "I'm sorry. I didn't believe you." Her voice cracked on the last word. I reached across the table, resting my hand over hers. "It's not about apologies now," I said quietly. "It's about finishing this." When the video ended, the assistant DA thanked me and promised a formal press statement by noon. We left through a side door into the parking lot. The Houston sun was higher now, glinting off car roofs, a sharp contrast to the gray dawn at the airport. Inside my car, the air smelled faintly of coffee and rain. I opened the glove box and lifted out a small velvet case. Inside lay my late husband's watch, the one he wore to every courthouse hearing during his years as a public defender. The leather strap was worn smooth from his wrist. I had kept it close through every loss, a quiet anchor. I held it out to Aveline. "Your father believed in quiet strength," I said. "Not weakness, not silence for its own sake. Quiet strength." She turned the watch in her hands, the morning light catching on the scratched crystal. "I think I'm starting to understand," she murmured. For a moment, the noise of the world fell away. No headlines, no bank statements, no boarding passes, just the two of us and the weight of the watch. Grief rose in my chest, soft but steady, mixing with a fierce protectiveness I had carried for decades. I slipped the watch back into its case and closed it firmly. "This is just one battle," I said. "Next, we lay out every transfer, every fake award in public view." I opened my phone, scrolling to Rowan's number, already drafting a calendar invite for a press conference with the DA's staff. My fingers moved quickly, but my voice stayed calm. Aveline watched me no longer with doubt, but with a tentative kind of respect. "What do you need me to do?" she asked. "Stay steady," I told her. "Tell the truth when it's time, and hold on to what matters." She nodded, clutching the folder of evidence to her chest. Outside the windshield, Houston traffic flowed ordinary and oblivious, but inside the car, something had shifted between us. Less fear, more resolve. With the confession unleashed and the watch back in its case, I knew the next move would decide everything. The courthouse conference room smelled faintly of old paper and lemon cleaner, the kind of scent that told you arguments had lived here for years. Aveline walked half a step behind me, clutching the folder we'd copied at dawn. I pushed open the heavy door and took in the lineup Gareth's attorney at the far end, with a legal pad Isolde seated beside him in a jacket too bright for the room, and two cousins we only saw at funerals. Just outside the glass, a thicket of microphones waited cords like black vines on the floor. The court's communications officer had granted the press limited access, no cameras inside, but they could stand at the threshold. A murmur drifted through the crack of the door as I set my briefcase on the table and clicked open the latches. No greetings, no apologies. The clock on the wall ticked toward 1. I slid out neatly labeled packets and a small portable speaker. The attorney adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat, but I didn't give him the air. "We'll be efficient," I said. "We have documentation to present, and then we will let the law take its course." Aveline drew a breath I could hear. I rested a hand on the briefcase lid, steady. The room quieted, expectant the way a theater hushes before the curtain lifts. I began with the simplest proof. Printed statements, dates in a clean column, amounts in gray, that turned to bold red, the week everything accelerated. I placed yellow tabs where each transfer left Aveline's account and landed in the shell company Gareth had opened. Isolde shifted in her chair. The cousins leaned forward as if the numbers could rearrange themselves if they stared hard enough. I kept my voice calm, almost instructional, like I was teaching a class. Here is the initial move. Here is the cascade. Here is where the so-called gift was purchased. I set down the forged signature comparison, Aveline's true signature, from her driver's license application beside the jagged version that authorized the joint line of credit. The attorney coughed. "We dispute the context," he said. "We don't dispute the hand," I answered, and let the weight of that hang. Then I tapped the speaker, playing the confession at a low volume, just enough for the room to hear Gareth's voice float up like oil. "She's so gullible," he laughed on cue. A cousin's mouth fell open. Someone outside the door whispered, "That's him," and pens scratched on paper. I muted the clip and slid over a still from the bank camera. Isolde's reflection in a glass partition, unmistakable. Her face blanched, then hardened. Context. The attorney repeated softer now. Patterns I corrected. I laid out a page that mapped withdrawals to deposits and purchases, to posts the award plaque, the watch on his wrist, the hotel charge in New Orleans that matched the weekend he told our family he was volunteering. Every piece fit. I didn't raise my voice. Evidence is loud enough when it's true. The door swung open hard enough to rattle the blinds. Gareth swept in. Ty loosened a smile he saved for donors pasted on like a decal. He looked around, expecting a private scolding he could charm away, and saw the cluster of reporters just beyond the threshold. A camera phone lifted. His smile twitched. "This is a family matter," he announced to the room, pitching his voice for the hallway. "We don't need an audience. You made it public when you posted the award." I said, "Still seated. We're just correcting the caption." A few chuckles leaked from the corridor. He shot me a glare, then pivoted to Aveline. "Honey, you're upset," he said, invoking a softness he'd long misplaced. "These numbers your mother's confusing you." Aveline's fingers tightened on the folder. For a moment, I saw the old reflex to shrink to apologize for doubting him. Then she straightened, voice steady enough to cut the room clean. He emptied my account, she said, eyes on the reporter's notebooks, and he ran. The words landed like a bell. Pens moved faster. The cousins stared at the table as if it had betrayed them too. Gareth tried to spin faster now. I moved funds to secure an investment for us. He told the press pool, angling his body to the door. Temporary, entirely above board. A reporter asked, "Then why is there a video of you calling your wife gullible?" Another chimed in. "And why does the gift charge appear on her statements the same day as your award?" He laughed a little too loud. "You're misinterpreting private jokes," he said. The attorney cut in with a thin smile. "We'll provide a statement after we review the materials." Isolde adjusted her sleeve and stared at me with the chill of someone who'd lost a bet she thought was fixed. I let silence do the work. In my experience, silence is a mirror. People can't help but reveal themselves when they fill it. Gareth filled it with defensive charm, then with irritation, then with small flashes of panic when no one rescued him. The assistant DA stepped into the doorway to remind everyone that charges were being evaluated. The hallway brightened with a new surge of cameras. I closed my folder deliberately, letting the click of the metal fastener break the momentum. "We're done here," I said, rising. "The numbers, the documents, and the video speak for themselves. We will let the law finish what we started." I looked at Aveline. She nodded, eyes steady, free hand, brushing the velvet watch case tucked in my purse as if to ground herself. We walked to the door together. The microphones lifted like a flock of gulls. Outside the threshold, light spilled across the marble, bright and almost kind. "Miss Quinlan, any statement someone called." I kept my voice even. "We've provided evidence. We trust the process." Flashbulbs popped in the hall. Aveline's arm slipped through mine, not as a child seeking shelter, but as an equal choosing where to stand. On the courthouse steps, the air tasted of sun-warmed stone and relief. We paused beneath the columns, and I drew out the watch case. The press didn't know what it meant, but the picture would travel farther than any speech, two women, a worn watch between them, time reclaimed. Aveline held the case with me, both our hands visible. Reporters called after Gareth as he exited behind us, questions layering on questions. He tried to shield his face. The smile was gone. "We go home now," I said quietly, not to escape, but to anchor. We eat something we call the other victim, and we set our next appointment with the DA. Aveline exhaled the sound of a door unlocking somewhere inside her. "Okay," she said. "I can do that." We moved down the steps slowly while the noise swelled behind us, stepping into sunlight that felt like the first honest weather all day. The weight I'd carried for years lifted, not all of it, not forever, but enough to let my shoulders drop and my jaw release. I didn't look back at the door. The narrative was no longer his to write. As we stepped into the sunlight, I felt the weight of years lift, but knew the aftermath had only begun. By the time we turned the key and stepped inside, the light had slipped to that soft Texas dusk that makes the blinds glow. The house held the quiet like a hymn. I set the kettle on and listened to the first slow rattle before the boil. Aveline went down the hall to shower. The bathroom fan hummed a steady note. On the counter, my phone blinked with fresh alerts headlines blooming and fading. Airport confession inquiry opened. I didn't chase any of them. I pulled a pad from the drawer and wrote 3 lines in a square hand. Who's safe? Who needs calling? What must be secured tonight? Then I drew 3 boxes beside each line. The kettle clicked. I poured 2 mugs and left one by the stove to cool a small promise that the day would end with something warm. When the DA's office number appeared, I answered on speaker and slid into the kitchen chair. Rowan's voice carried that clipped fatigue only adrenaline can imitate. He patched in the assistant DA who didn't waste time. The confession recording the forged documents and the scene at the airport met the threshold. A judge had reviewed the packet and signed an arrest warrant. A second order approved the impound of Gareth's laptop and phone, plus any cloud accounts tied to the shell company. I asked what they needed from me, and the answer was simple: not to interfere. I confirmed they already had my index dates, file names, metadata, the chart that connected purchases to withdrawals. Your timeline is tight, the ADA said. It will help the prosecutor's office more than you know. I looked at the mug by the stove and let myself feel the rise of relief, like the first full breath after a long swim. Not joy, not yet, just the clean air that comes when someone finally names the wrong and marks it down. While we spoke, another alert slid across the phone, a short bulletin from the courthouse confirming the warrant. Rowan promised to notify us when the team moved and reminded me that devices sometimes walk, so we should change passwords again and keep 2s of everything. 2 copies, 2 secure locations, 2 people who know. We're past the point where charm can stall, he said. Now it's paperwork and procedure. I thanked him. When the line went quiet, I stared at the 3 boxes on my list and filled 2 without thinking Aveline is safe. Account secured. The last box waited, who needs calling? The answer arrived before I could decide. Email after email chimed into the inbox I had listed on a single press sheet outside the courthouse door. The first message read, "I think this happened to me." And the second stripped out the hedging, "It did happen to me, and I don't know how to start." A third woman asked if we could speak by phone because writing made her shake. I called and she cried quietly while she explained how temporary transfers had turned permanent, how questions met silence, how she had told no one out of shame. The details shifted: different jobs, different banks, different cities, just far enough to feel alone. But the bones of the story matched like fingerprints. I listened and took notes, stopping only to ask if she was safe and if there were any children who needed shielding tonight. By the 4th call, a shape had formed in my mind. This wasn't just a case. It was a pattern that counted on isolation to survive. I texted Rowan, small group forming, "Can you bring intake forms?" Then I called the community center and asked for a room. The woman at the desk recognized my name from the noon broadcast. The sympathy in her voice made my throat tighten. "We'll keep the side door open," she said. "We'll make it easy." I printed a single sheet in a large black font and tucked it into my bag with clothespins. "You are not alone." It felt simple to the point of thin, but I had learned that the first step back into the world needs fewer words than you think. Sunset painted the kitchen pink and gold while we drove. Aveline sat quietly in the passenger seat, hair-damp hands folded around the folder that had followed us all day like a second heartbeat. "You don't have to speak tonight," I said. "Listening is enough." She nodded and looked out the window. "I want to listen," she said, "and I want to help." It was not a vow to forgive or forget. It was a decision to contribute, and that was heavier and more useful. The community center room was small with beige walls and a bulletin board cluttered with lost dog notices and potluck sign-ups. We pinned the sheet to the door and set the chairs in a loose circle. One by one, they came: a woman in a navy blazer with a banker's posture and trembling hands, a teacher with a tote bag full of papers she'd been too scared to open, a grandmother who sat with her back straight and her jaw set as if daring grief to knock her down again. Rowan arrived with a stack of forms and a legal pad already half full. I poured water into paper cups and sat at the same level as everyone else. Titles and ages and resumes stayed outside. Inside, we were just people who had been told to doubt our own eyes. I spoke first only enough to mark the ground. Here are the next steps, I said. We document, we place alerts, we coordinate. We do not warn him, we do not argue with him. We act and we let the officers do their jobs. Then I folded my hands and listened while they told their versions. The advisor who wasn't on the payroll. The bridge loan that never bridged back the way charm turned to contempt when questions grew crisp. Aveline wrote names and dates in a neat column, then looked up at each woman as if willing courage to travel across the room. Rowan collected copies of the proof they had and circled missing pieces with an easy patience that made the checklist feel like a lifeline rather than a test. By the time we traded contact information, something sturdier than fury had settled in the room. We agreed on a shared spreadsheet that Rowan would host a weekly check-in by video for those who could not drive at night and a dedicated email that Aveline offered to manage. If a message comes in after midnight, I'll still see it, she said, and the teacher smiled for the first time. We didn't try to solve what we could not control. We set the next meeting and we stood up. Night had taken the parking lot. The air held that dampness Houston wears like a shawl. We walked the women to their cars not because we thought danger lurked, but because accompaniment is a medicine too few people value. When the last tail lights melted into the street, Aveline leaned against the car and closed her eyes. I thought I was the only one, she said softly. They all thought they were the only one I answered. He counted on that. She pressed her lips together and nodded as if filing the sentence into a place she could use later. Back home, the house felt familiar again, not like a crime scene or a command post, but like a place that could hold ordinary life. I sent the group's notes to Rowan with a subject line that would make sense to a prosecutor scanning at midnight. Then I set my phone face down beside the sink and turned off the kitchen light. It lit up before I reached the hall. An unknown number. I answered, and a voice I didn't recognize spoke fast and low. If you want the rest, check the storage by the old ship channel, Unit 218. The call ended. I stood still in the dark and listened to the hum of the refrigerator, the steadying sound of a machine that knows its only job. I took a screenshot of the call log and the transcribed voicemail attached both to a new email and sent them to Rowan with one line, "Tomorrow." Then I placed the phone beside the sleeping mug of tea I had never touched and finally let my shoulders drop. The day had taken everything it wanted. I would decide what tomorrow could take. The message about Unit 218 didn't scare me. It focused me. I woke before sunrise, the townhouse still dark, except for a thin strip of light under the kitchen door. The scent of coffee grounded me as I stood at the counter. Legal pad opened 3 neat columns across the top, evidence, contacts, next steps. My handwriting was steady, each letter a small promise to myself. On the pad, under evidence, I wrote, Unit 218, red ledger, thumb drive. Under contacts, Rowan DA liaison, date, Ortiz. My phone buzzed on the counter. Rowan's text glowed, warrant signed. Meet HPD DA at storage facility 8:30. Another quick message to Aveline. Stay home, rest. Be ready for late morning video call. She replied with a single heart. The house smelled of rain and ink and resolve. By 8:25, I was driving east toward the ship channel, the sky pale gray with low clouds. The industrial district smelled of salt oil and metal. Dedag Ortiz stood outside the corrugated row of storage units, clipboard under his arm, 2 uniformed officers beside him. He raised a hand as I pulled up. The keypad beeped and the roll-up door of Unit 218 rattled open with a groan. A faint, dusty smell rushed out like old paper left too long in the sun. Inside sat a single banker's box and a battered duffel. Ortiz snapped on gloves and opened the box. Envelopes thick with cash were stacked in rubber bands, a red leather ledger resting on top. In the duffel, a sunglasses case held a thumb drive the color of gunmetal. I crouched, reading the embossed initials on the ledger GC. My fingers trembled, but my voice stayed even as I read aloud the dates and amounts. Every withdrawal from Aveline's account, every temporary transfer Gareth had bragged about, lined up in careful columns of ink. Next to each, the names of Shell LLCs. "This is it," Rowan murmured behind me, phone raised to photograph. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply closed the ledger and handed it back to Ortiz to be bagged. The officer called out evidence numbers, the clatter of his tags echoing in the metal unit. In the parking lot, Rowan already had the DA on speaker, requesting expedited subpoenas for related storage units and bank records. I stepped aside and texted Aveline, "It's real. You're not crazy. We move now." The evidence van left with its flashing hazards, and I drove back across town to my kitchen. The morning light poured through the blinds, turning the steam from my mug into a thin ghost. At 11:00, my laptop chimed. The board of Meridian Bay advisors was assembling on video. Aveline sat off-camera, the folder of forged signatures in her lap. Faces popped onto the screen: compliance chief, 2 directors outside counsel. Gareth's box lit up last from an undisclosed location. He launched into a slick tone about temporary reallocations, but the compliance chief interrupted, sharing screenshots from the red ledger and matching CRM exports. My thumb hovered over the mute button. I waited until the room was silent. "The ledger shows my daughter's funds routed through 3 shells you formed," I said evenly. Aveline leaned into the frame, voice clear. "He emptied my account. Council recommended immediate suspension. The board voted, hands raised one by one, for removal for cause pending litigation and mandatory reports to regulators." Gareth's image froze mid-sentence before disappearing entirely. I closed my laptop without ceremony. The firm issued a statement within minutes. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. Cameras clicked as I descended the steps, Aveline beside me, both of us holding the heirloom watch together like a small flag of endurance. "We trust the process and stand with other victims," I said into the microphones. Nothing more. My phone buzzed again as we reached the car. An email from the SEC duty officer, initial, freezes on 2 shell accounts based on the thumb drive contents. I forwarded it to the victim circle with a single line. "Tomorrow we widen the net." With the red ledger logged and Gareth removed, the real work restitution and reckoning finally had teeth. The morning after Unit 218 felt strangely hushed, yet electric, as if the whole city had taken a sharp breath and was holding it. By 7:15 a.m., my phone was vibrating in small, insistent bursts on the counter beside my tea mug. Meridian Bay's official statement was everywhere: screenshots, push alerts, and subject lines marked "breaking." Local business associations were already tweeting about reassessing vendor relationships, and 2 former clients quietly forwarded me suspension notices with Gareth's name circled in red. I logged each name and date into a clean spreadsheet for Rowan, set up a calm auto-reply for victims, and texted Aveline a single line: "You're believed." Relief braided itself with vigilance inside me. This wasn't victory yet, it was a shifting tide I had to steer. On my morning walk through the Heights, the air felt different. Overnight rain left a crisp scent on the sidewalks, and sunlight slanted off porch railings. At the corner coffee shop, the barista slid a free drip toward me and murmured, "For your daughter." A few blocks down, someone had peeled Gareth's photo off a Chamber of Commerce banner. In my inbox, a HOA email announced a review of all vendor contracts tied to his firms. Quiet solidarity replaced the whispers of last month, and I felt a softened gratitude at each small sign. Reputation, like trust, was shifting at street level. By late morning, Aveline and I sat across from Rowan and the assistant DA in a small prep room at the Harris County building. Fluorescent light hummed overhead. A stack of evidence boxes lined one wall. Aveline fidgeted with the blue bonnet brooch pinned to her cardigan, our family's little hope anchor. The ADA walked us through probable charges, restitution procedures, and witness logistics with a steady teaching rhythm. I asked the practical questions: chain of custody, address confidentiality, the victim pool mechanics. The ADA slid a sample impact statement across to Aveline. She read it silently, jaw set the brooch, catching the light every time she moved. When we stepped into the corridor for a break, the decision that had been brewing inside her came to the surface. "I'll testify," she said softly but firmly. "Not just affidavits. I want to read it in court." I didn't cheer or clutch her hands. I simply nodded, offering structure instead of celebration. "3 pillars," I said quietly. "What was taken, how he isolated you, and what rebuilding looks like for others." She opened her phone and began typing opening lines on the Notes app, her shoulders straightening as each word appeared. Resolve bloomed where survival had been, and my maternal pride stayed at a respectful distance, letting her voice be her own. That afternoon, we met at the community center on 20th Street, the same modest room where the first victim circle had gathered. Folding chairs formed a loose circle. Sunlight streamed through the high windows. Rowan explained recovery timelines and intake forms. 2 attendees volunteered to act as point persons for outreach. I outlined next steps and collected 3 more corroborating documents for the red ledger entries. Then Aveline stood and read the opening of her draft impact statement. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied by the final sentence. Heads around the circle nodded. Pens scribbled. Isolation dissolved into a network. Collective courage had a sound. It was quiet but unmistakable. Back at my townhouse at dusk, we taped Aveline's draft pages to the fridge, each sheet a stepping stone. The kitchen smelled of chamomile as I brewed tea. Rowan called to report the SEC had broadened freezes to a 3rd shell account and penciled an earlier hearing date. We role-played 2 hostile questions briefly, then stopped before exhaustion could creep in. When the house finally fell silent, I sat with my lists, wrote a single word at the top restitution, and underlined it once. With Aveline's words taped in our kitchen light, the next step wasn't survival. It was the reckoning. A pale gray Texas dawn hung over the courthouse, as if the sky itself had been holding its breath with us. 2 weeks had passed since the raid on Unit 218, yet the weight of the case had never really left my shoulders. I walked up the stone steps with Aveline at my side, and Rowan just behind his folders tucked under one arm. Reporters murmured at a respectful distance. The frenzy of the earlier weeks had cooled into a solemn expectancy. I could feel Aveline's hand trembling against mine, but I didn't squeeze it to calm her. She had found her own footing. Inside the marble lobby, the echo of our shoes carried us to the courtroom doors, where a bailiff nodded us through. The judge entered with an unhurried step, robes swaying. One by one, he read the terms of the plea deal. Full restitution to each named victim, a public apology letter drafted and signed by Gareth, and a 5-year ban on holding any fiduciary role. The words rolled like measured stones dropping into water. I closed my eyes for a heartbeat and let the sound wash over me. Not triumph, not revenge, but a long-held breath finally released. Gareth sat at the defense table, jaw-tight eyes darting toward the benches where victims clustered. For the first time, I didn't flinch under his glance. When Aveline's name was called, she rose without looking back at me. Her impact statement was printed in clean blue ink, the same shade as the little brooch pinned to her cardigan. Her voice trembled, once then steadied into a clear line of truth. "We are not invisible," she finished. The courtroom held its breath. Even the bailiff shifted on his feet. I reached for her hand, but said nothing. She signed the restitution documents next to my signature, Rowan filing the victim fund paperwork in a practiced motion. Pride swelled in me. Tender and quiet, this was her voice now, not mine. By afternoon, we gathered at the community center where so many late-night meetings had taken place. Someone had printed copies of the signed restitution orders and taped them to the bulletin board beneath a photograph of the blue bonnet brooch. The air smelled of coffee and homemade bread. We sat in a circle of folding chairs, no microphones, no flashbulbs, just a low hum of conversation. One woman announced she was starting a nonprofit seed group to help other families detect financial abuse earlier. Aveline raised her hand to volunteer. We passed around mugs and pens. Names and emails filled a fresh sign-up sheet. In that small room, isolation dissolved into something steadier, like beams crossing to form a roof. As the day dipped toward evening, I returned to my townhouse. The kitchen still bore the taped pages of Aveline's statement, but now they fluttered next to a new sign, restitution received. I stepped out to the porch with my old notebook, the red ledger now transformed into a blue one. The sky over Houston glowed amber, streaked with pink. On the final page, I had drawn 3 columns for months' contacts and rebuilding plans. With a deliberate stroke, I crossed out the last name and wrote a single word at the bottom, begin. Aveline stepped out carrying 2 mugs of tea. We sat without speaking, letting the evening settle like a soft quilt. In my mind, and for the eventual voiceover, I would record a closing line formed, "Justice can be public, but healing is personal." And sometimes the loudest triumph is the one said only to yourself. The porch light clicked on automatically. Beyond it, the city hummed traffic birds, settling the faint clink of someone's wind chimes. I lifted my mug, inhaled the steam, and felt the old weight shift into something lighter. This wasn't an ending of erasure, but of expansion, a quiet horizon where I could step forward without bitterness, still a mother, still myself, yet no longer defined by betrayal. Looking back on everything I've shared with you, I see more than courtrooms and ledgers. I see the quiet power of paying attention, speaking up, and standing together. As a mother, I once thought silence was my only shield. Now I know silence can also be a strategy, and truth spoken at the right moment can change lives. If my journey taught me anything, it's that no matter your age or situation, you have the right to protect your dignity, your family, and your future. What would you do if you discovered a betrayal this deep? Have you ever had to choose between staying quiet and taking action? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this story touched your heart, leave a 1 or tell me where you're watching from. And if you want more real-life lessons and inspiring stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next one.